Chapter 1. A Plea from Another World. The city of New Haven was a sprawling metropolis, alive with the hum of hover cars, the distant buzz of air taxis, and the rhythmic flow of pedestrians moving in and out of the neon-lit streets. It was the kind of city that seemed to never sleep, where the pulse of technology and commerce beat through every crack and crevice. From the towering skyscrapers that seemed to scrape the sky to the quiet alleyways that held the remnants of a bygone era, New Haven had everything except for the one thing David Kingston had always dreamed of: peace. David had always found solace in the mechanical world, a world that, for all its complexities, was something he could fix. A broken engine, a worn-out hovercar, a faulty drone, he could bring them back to life, make them run again with his skilled hands and his knowledge of machinery. He had been raised in the grimy underbelly of New Haven, a place where people like him could be forgotten just as easily as they could be swept into the tide of the city's overwhelming progress. He wasn't wealthy. He didn't belong to the shiny corporate world that ran the city. He wasn't a man who could afford the luxury of a smooth, easy life. But there was something about fixing things, about bringing order to chaos, that made him feel as if he had a place in this world. He wasn't a master mechanic by any means, but he had a talent, an innate understanding of how things worked, and that had kept him afloat. For the most part, David had always been content with his life. It was simple, and simplicity suited him. Yet, as the days went by, he couldn't help but feel a nagging emptiness deep inside of him. A feeling that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how many machines he repaired, something was missing. He longed for something more, though he didn't know what that was, and it gnawed at him, slowly taking root in his mind, like an itch that couldn't be scratched. One rainy afternoon, as the dark clouds rolled over New Haven and the sky released a heavy downpour, David found himself inside the small mechanic shop he called home. The place was tucked away on the outskirts of the city, hidden from the gleaming, pristine streets of the wealthy districts. His shop, the rusted gear, was a place for the forgotten, for the broken, for the things that no longer had value in a world where everything seemed to be automated. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his. The walls were lined with tools, half-finished projects, and shelves of spare parts that had accumulated over the years. The air smelled faintly of oil and rust, a scent David had come to associate with comfort and purpose. He had always liked it here, the quiet hum of his work echoing in the background as he focused on the task at hand. The latest project he was working on, a hoverbike with a damaged fuel regulator, was proving to be more difficult than he had anticipated. The engine wasn't responding the way it should, and no matter how many times he adjusted the wires, it refused to start. He wiped the sweat from his brow and sighed, leaning back against the workbench. The rain outside drummed against the windows, a steady rhythm that matched the frustration building inside of him. He had been at this for hours, and still, nothing. It was a simple repair. At least, it should have been. He wasn't sure if it was the weather or the constant feeling of being overwhelmed by the city's perpetual march into the future, but today, nothing seemed to go right. The machines, once so familiar and predictable, now seemed like unsolvable puzzles. He ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him, the same world that constantly reminded him of his insignificance. That was when the door to his shop opened. David didn't hear the usual sound of footsteps approaching. He didn't hear the familiar shuffle of a pedestrian or the telltale whoosh of a hovering vehicle stopping outside. This was something different, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. For a moment, he thought it was just the wind, the sound of the storm outside echoing through the doorframe. But then, there was a soft chime, and the door clicked shut behind whoever it was. David's eyes snapped up, and he was met with the strangest sight he had ever seen. Standing in the doorway was a woman, tall, regal, and completely out of place in his shop. She wasn't wearing the typical outfit of a customer who had stumbled in to get their vehicle fixed. There were no casual clothes, no practical boots or jackets. No, she stood there in something entirely different. Her outfit was elegant, flowing, as though it had been designed not for a human, but for someone from another world entirely. Her skin shimmered with a faint glow, a hue somewhere between silver and lavender, and her features were almost too perfect, too symmetrical, to be real. She had long, flowing hair that seemed to defy gravity, the strands shifting in color as they caught the light. But it was her eyes that held David's attention. They were bright, almost luminescent, and as they locked onto him, David felt as though she could see right through him, as though she could peel away every layer of his existence and expose him for who he truly was. David stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether he was seeing things or whether this woman was a figment of his overworked imagination. But no, she was real. She was standing right there, in front of him, and she wasn't leaving anytime soon. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He wasn't used to being speechless, but something about her presence made him feel small, insignificant. I can help you," David stammered, his words coming out slower than usual, as if he were still trying to comprehend the situation. The woman smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that was reassuring or warm. It was distant, as though she were offering something far more important than a mere exchange of pleasantries. "I need your help," she said in a voice that was smooth and calm, with an undertone of something almost otherworldly. "My ship is damaged, and I am stranded on this planet. I have come to you for assistance." She paused for a moment, studying him with an intensity that sent a shiver down David's spine. "But it is not only my ship that is broken." David blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "Your ship?" he asked, confused. "Wait, are you telling me that you dash?" Before he could finish his sentence, the woman stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I am an alien," she said, her tone matter of fact. "I come from a distant planet, and I am stranded here. I have lost everything. My family, my home, my children. I need your help, human. Not just for my ship, but for my children. I have nowhere else to turn." David's mind was spinning. An alien. She was really an alien. Of course, the evidence was right in front of him, but it was so far beyond anything he could have imagined. His mind couldn't grasp it. He wasn't sure whether to be terrified, intrigued, or just plain confused. But the sadness in her voice, the pain in her eyes, made him hesitate. Whatever this woman was, whatever her circumstances, she seemed genuine. She wasn't here to cause harm. She wasn't here to take something from him. She was just asking for help. "Children?" David asked, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. "Wait, you're not saying? You're asking me to what exactly?" "I am asking you," she said, her voice soft but resolute, "to become my husband and adopt my children." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. David blinked, unable to process the request. "What?" She stepped closer, her eyes searching his, her expression softening. "I have no other choice. The galaxy is a dangerous place for those like me, widowed, alone, with no one left to care for my children. I cannot go back to my homeworld. My people are lost, and the very ones who could help me have turned their backs. You are the only one who can help me, human. You are the only one who can save my children." David stared at her, unable to fully comprehend what she was saying. She wanted him to be her husband? To adopt her children? A human mechanic, living alone in a rundown shop in the middle of a city that had all but forgotten about him. To step into a role that could change everything he knew about life? But as he looked into her eyes, he saw the desperation there, the raw emotion, the longing for something more than what she had left behind. It wasn't about marriage in the traditional sense. It was about survival, about protecting those she loved, even in the face of loss. "Why me?" he asked, finally finding his voice again. "Why come to me? I'm just a mechanic." She tilted her head, as though considering his question. "Because," she said softly, "you are the only one who didn't turn me away." David was silent for a long moment, his mind racing. Could he really do this? Could he really take on a responsibility like that? A marriage, children, the weight of her world and her people's survival? He had no answers, no solutions. But for reasons he couldn't explain, he knew he couldn't turn her away. Maybe it was his stubbornness, or maybe it was the same longing inside him that had always pushed him to fix broken things. Maybe he just didn't want to be alone anymore. "I'll help," he said, finally, his voice steady despite the whirlwind inside him. "I don't know how, but I'll help." The woman smiled, this time with a warmth that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping forward and placing a hand on his arm. "You have no idea what this means to me." And in that moment, as David stood there, holding the weight of the universe in his hands, he realized that everything was about to change. He had no idea what lay ahead, no idea how he could possibly take on the responsibility she was asking of him, but somehow, deep inside, he knew that he had made the right choice. The unknown had come to him, and he was going to meet it head-on, no matter what the cost. David stood there, stunned, still processing what the alien woman had just asked him. Become her husband? Adopt her children? His mind kept looping through the words, like a broken record, and he couldn't seem to make sense of it. He was a mechanic, for heaven's sake. A simple man, struggling to keep a small business running in the heart of a city that was growing colder with every passing day. He didn't know the first thing about parenting, about being someone's husband, let alone an alien widow's husband. He had no skills for that kind of thing. The woman, though, didn't seem impatient, nor did she rush him. She simply stood there, her luminous eyes softening as she took in his reaction, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and quiet resolve. The energy she radiated, though unsettling at first, began to feel less like an alien force and more like a woman in distress. A mother in pain. A person with a need so desperate that she had come to a stranger, a mechanic in a rundown shop, to ask for help. Her presence was magnetic, pulling David in with the weight of her grief and the intensity of her request. He wasn't sure how long they stood there, the weight of silence between them, but in that stillness, something inside of him shifted. He wasn't a person who enjoyed conflict or chaos. He preferred his life to be simple, clean, uncomplicated. But there was something about this woman, about the way she had looked at him with such expectation, that made his heart tug in ways he hadn't expected. She was alone. She had no one else. And for reasons he didn't understand, David knew that he couldn't turn her away. "How can I help you?" David finally asked, his voice almost a whisper, barely finding the strength to speak the words. The alien woman, whose name he hadn't yet learned, stepped forward. She moved with grace, her presence commanding the space around them. "I know this is a strange request, human," she said, her voice calm, yet firm. "But my children are in danger. Without a protector, without someone who can guide them, they will be lost to the cosmos. And I am their last hope." David's heart twisted at the rawness of her words. It wasn't just about her survival, it was about the survival of her children. He could see the pain in her eyes, the quiet suffering beneath her regal exterior. The desperation was palpable, and in it, David saw something that stirred his own buried emotions. He had never known the kind of love a parent had for their child, but in that moment, he understood the depths of her plea. "I don't know what I can offer you," David said, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "I can't give you what you're asking. I'm just a man. I fix things, machines. I don't know anything about raising kids, especially alien kids." The woman smiled softly, almost as if she had been expecting this response. "You're more capable than you realize, David Kingston," she said. "You see things differently than others. You fix broken things, yes, but sometimes the most important thing is the willingness to care, to make the right choices when they matter most. My children need that, and I can see in you the heart to provide that." David stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not for his own survival, but for someone else's. This wasn't just about fixing machines, it was about fixing lives. His life had always been about solving problems, about making things run smoothly again. But this was different. This wasn't a broken engine or a malfunctioning circuit. This was something far more complex and fragile. "Okay," David said, the words slipping from his lips before he could stop it. "I don't know how, but I'll try. I'll do what I can." The woman's expression softened, her eyes gleaming with gratitude. "That is all I ask. You will not regret this, David Kingston. I promise you." And in that moment, David knew his life was about to change. He had taken the first step, however uncertain it was. The future seemed terrifying, uncertain, but there was no going back. He had made his choice. Chapter 2. The Children. The following days were a blur of uncertainty and preparation. David had never been particularly good at adjusting to sudden changes in his life, but this was something else entirely. A request to marry an alien widow and adopt her children? It was absurd, and yet the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had no real choice. He couldn't back out now. The alien woman had made her request, and despite the impossibility of it, David felt an undeniable pull to help her. He wasn't sure how he was going to manage being a husband, let alone a father to children he had never met. But as he prepared for the unknown, he found himself spending more time at the rusty gear, mechanically working through his thoughts, doing what he did best, fixing things. He found comfort in the familiar rhythm of his work, but the tension in the air was never far away. It clung to him, pressing on his chest like a weight. David didn't have the luxury of time to ease into this new reality. The alien woman, whose name he now learned was HFY, had told him that her children were not safe in the current galaxy. Something about a war, about her people being caught in the crossfire of a conflict so ancient that it had seemed forgotten. They had been forced to flee their home world when it became a battleground, and their ship, damaged in the chaos, had crash-landed on Earth. With no way to return to their home, HFY had come to David, the only person she thought might be able to help her protect her children. After a few days of discussion and preparation, David found himself standing in his shop once more, the tools around him suddenly feeling unfamiliar. HFY had arrived with a small spacecraft, hidden out of sight in an alleyway behind the shop, and it was there that she introduced him to her children. The first to step out of the ship was a girl, no older than 10, with pale lavender skin like her mother. Her features were delicate and otherworldly, her eyes large and bright, glowing faintly with an ethereal light. She was quiet, her gaze intense as she observed David from a distance, her expression guarded. "Her name is Alicia," HFY said softly, her voice tinged with pride. "She is the older of my children. She's strong, intelligent, but she's been through so much. She doesn't trust easily." David knelt down, trying to make himself appear less intimidating, though he knew it was a futile effort. He wasn't sure what to say to a child who wasn't human, who came from a world so different from his own. But the girl didn't run away. She didn't speak either, but she looked at him with a kind of wary curiosity. It was a silent understanding, and David could tell that, despite her cautiousness, she was waiting for him to prove himself. A soft voice called out from behind Alicia, "Mama." Turning toward the sound, David saw a smaller figure emerge from the ship. This child was younger, barely 4 years old, with a softer, more innocent appearance. Her skin shimmered faintly like her mother's, but her eyes were wide and full of wonder. She had a quiet innocence about her, a stark contrast to Alicia's guarded demeanor. "This is Zira," HFY said, her voice breaking slightly. "She's my youngest. She was only a baby when our world was destroyed. She's still so small, and yet, she's been through more than a child should ever experience." Zira's big eyes locked onto David, and she took a tentative step forward. She seemed less hesitant than Alicia, her curiosity drawing her closer. She smiled shyly, her small, alien hands reaching out to touch the hem of David's shirt. David smiled gently, bending down to meet her. "Hey there, Zira," he said softly. "I'm David." Zira's smile widened, and she nodded in return. Alicia, on the other hand, was still watching from a distance, her expression a mix of wariness and contemplation. "Do you promise to keep us safe?" Alicia asked suddenly, her voice quiet but firm, as if she had been carrying this question for a long time. David was caught off guard by the seriousness in her tone, the weight of her words sinking deep into his chest. He hadn't expected to be asked such a direct question by a child, but there was no hesitation in his answer. "I promise," David said, looking into her glowing eyes with a sincerity that surprised even him. "I don't know how, but I promise you, I will do everything I can to keep you both safe." For a moment, the room was still. Alicia's gaze softened, and for the first time since she had entered, she took a step forward, her mother's hand resting gently on her shoulder. HFY looked at David with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "You've already given them hope, David Kingston," she said. "That's more than I could have asked for." David nodded, his heart filled with a strange mix of fear and determination. This was no longer just about fixing machines. It was about something much greater, something far beyond his understanding. And as he looked at the two alien children before him, he realized that this was his new purpose. His life, the one that had once been quiet and predictable, was now a chaotic, unpredictable adventure. But in that chaos, David saw a chance for something he never thought he would have: a family. The days following Alicia and Zira's arrival were a blur of adjustment for David. The small, quiet mechanic shop had become a strange and foreign place, filled with the sounds of alien laughter, the soft thud of small footsteps, and the warmth of a family he had never asked for but now felt responsible for. David was, in every way, out of his depth. He had always lived alone. His only companions were the machines he fixed and the occasional customer who came into the rusty gear. But now, his days were filled with more than just grease and metal. There were the quiet, lingering conversations with RHLR, the soft requests from Zira for bedtime stories that he could barely understand, and the more complicated, quieter moments with Alicia, who seemed to hold a lot of untold stories in her bright, glowing eyes. At first, David was unsure how to handle the situation. He wasn't a parent. He didn't know how to care for two children, especially not alien ones. He wasn't even sure if he was capable of being a father figure to them. He had no idea about their cultural differences, no idea how to communicate with them in a way that would ease their fears. Alicia, despite her wariness, had been the first to break the silence. She had begun helping David in the shop, handing him tools, watching his work with interest, and asking him questions about the machines. It was obvious that she wasn't a child in the traditional sense. Her intelligence was sharp, far beyond that of any earthling child her age. It was as though her mind had already been sharpened by years of experience, by the devastation of her homeworld and the survival instincts she had inherited from her alien heritage. Still, she had an innocence about her, something that made her seem both older and younger than she truly was. Zira, on the other hand, was still very much a child. She had yet to fully comprehend the world around her, and while she clung to her mother for comfort, she seemed to sense that David was somehow safe. It was during one of these long days, while David was adjusting the fuel regulator on a rusted hoverbike, that he realized just how deeply this new life had already taken root in his heart. RHLR was sitting across the room, watching over Zira as she played with a toy David had found in the back of the shop, a simple, old-fashioned ball, which Zira seemed to have fallen in love with. Alicia was beside him, handing him a tool to replace a part on the bike. "You've done well," David said, glancing at her, a small smile creeping onto his face as he worked. Alicia met his gaze, her face unreadable, but there was something in the way she looked at him that softened the distance between them. "I learned quickly," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. David nodded, realizing that even though she didn't fully trust him, even though there was a certain wariness in her eyes, Alicia was starting to see him as someone she could rely on. That realization settled deeply within him, bringing both comfort and fear in equal measure. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, David found himself sitting across from RHLR in the small, dimly lit corner of the shop. The quiet hum of the shop's overhead lights was the only sound that filled the room. RHLR had said little about her past, but as the days wore on, David could sense the weight of her story. The sadness that lingered in her eyes when she spoke of her people, of her lost home, told him far more than she had ever said. Her people had been a peaceful race, known for their advanced technology and knowledge of the cosmos. But that had all changed when war had come to their doorstep. A war that had destroyed their planet and sent them fleeing into the galaxy. Her ship had been damaged beyond repair, and with no way to return to their home, RHLR had come to Earth, a planet she had never intended to visit, but where she had been forced to land. As David sat across from her, their conversation turned to what they would do next. RHLR's voice was soft but firm as she spoke of the trials her people had endured and the uncertainty of the future. "I don't know where we will go from here," she said, her gaze distant, as though lost in thought. "My people are gone. My planet is gone. And now I am here, on a world I never expected to be on, with two children who depend on me." David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. He wasn't sure if he was prepared for the responsibility that had been thrust upon him, but he couldn't turn away. He had already committed. He had already promised to help. And despite the uncertainty, he knew there was no turning back. "I don't know how to do this," David admitted quietly, looking down at his hands. "I don't know how to raise children who aren't from here. I don't know how to be a husband or a father to you and your kids. I'm just a mechanic. I fix things. I don't know how to fix lives." RHLR looked at him, her eyes softening with something that resembled understanding. "You are not alone in this, David. You may not have the skills you think you need, but you have something far more important, a heart willing to help. That's all my children need right now. That's all I need." David nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle inside him. It wouldn't be easy, and it would never be perfect, but they were in this together. And somehow, they would find a way. Chapter 3, a new beginning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change and adjustment. David found himself constantly navigating the tension between his old life, his quiet, solitary existence as a mechanic, and this new, strange reality he had found himself thrust into. RHLR's children were adjusting, but it wasn't without difficulty. Alicia was strong, but she was also burdened by the weight of her past. She still didn't fully trust David, and there were moments when the loneliness in her eyes would break through the cool facade she had built. Zira, though younger, was far more open to David. She would climb into his lap as he worked, her small hands reaching for tools, her curiosity boundless. She had a lightness to her, an innocence that balanced the heavier emotions in the house. David spent his days at the Rusty Gear, continuing to repair broken machines, though now his focus was as much on the children as it was on the projects he had always taken up. He was no longer working just for himself. Every task he completed, every car he repaired, every engine he fixed, seemed to carry a weight, a responsibility he hadn't anticipated. There were nights when he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how he had gone from a simple mechanic to a father figure for two alien children. But somehow, through the quiet moments of shared meals and the slow process of bonding, he began to understand something deeper. He wasn't just fixing machines. He was fixing lives, one small step at a time. RHLR, too, had begun to open up more. She would sit with him in the evenings, talking about her people, her planet, and the family she had lost. It was through these conversations that David began to understand just how much weight she carried on her shoulders. She wasn't just a mother. She was the last of her kind, responsible for two children in a world that didn't know her, a world that had no place for her. Yet, in the quiet moments, David saw the strength that RHLR had. It was in the way she cared for her children, in the way she looked at him with gratitude and a quiet determination. As the days passed, David found himself becoming more than just a caretaker. He became a protector, a guide, and a part of the family, even if it felt strange at times. There were moments of doubt, moments when he questioned his ability to handle everything that had been placed on his shoulders. But when he looked into the eyes of Alicia or Zira, when he saw the trust beginning to form in their gazes, he knew that he was doing the right thing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, David sat outside the shop with RHLR. The quiet was peaceful, but it was also filled with the weight of the unknown. "We don't have to do this alone," David said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're a team now. We'll figure it out." RHLR turned to him, her eyes glimmering with a quiet, unspoken gratitude. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Together, we will rebuild. Together, we will create a future for my children, for us all." David smiled, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose that he hadn't known he was capable of. This wasn't just about fixing machines anymore. It was about something much larger: a family, a new beginning, and the chance to make a real difference in the lives of those who needed him the most. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, David knew one thing for sure: he had found his place. It wasn't in the sterile, polished world of New Haven, but in the broken, imperfect world he had made with RHLR and her children. He had fixed what was broken, and now, he would help them rebuild. Together, they would find their way. Days turned into weeks, and David's life continued to be shaped by the presence of RHLR, Alicia, and Zira. The shop had taken on a new rhythm, one that wasn't entirely comfortable yet, but felt like it had potential. As the children grew more accustomed to their new life on Earth, their anxieties began to ebb. Alicia, who had initially kept her distance, slowly warmed up to David. She would still watch him with a careful, assessing gaze, but every now and then, he would catch her offering him a small smile or a quiet thank you when he fixed something for her. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Zira, on the other hand, had already begun to treat David like an older brother, constantly asking him to show her how things worked in the shop, handing him tools as she tried to imitate his movements. She was small, with big, innocent eyes that seemed to see the world with a sense of wonder, and David couldn't help but feel a deep sense of protectiveness for her. He had never known the bond of fatherhood, but with Zira, it came more naturally. She had an openness to life that David hadn't realized he needed, and in her laughter, He found a sense of joy he hadn't known he'd been missing. RHLR, too, had begun to open up more. Though her past remained mostly a mystery, there were moments when she would share stories of her homeworld, of her people, and of the life she had lost. Her grief was always there, just beneath the surface, but there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. She was a survivor, a mother trying to rebuild what had been lost, and though the weight of her world rested heavily on her shoulders, she carried it with grace. She had moments of vulnerability, especially when she looked at her children, and David began to realize that while she had given him a chance to help her, she was helping him just as much. In the evenings, after a long day's work, they would sit together outside the shop, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was in these moments of quiet that David felt the weight of the decisions he had made. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a protector, a father, and a husband, though he still wasn't sure if he fully understood what those titles meant. But RHLR had accepted him into her family, and in return, David found himself giving more than he ever thought possible. He had never been one for grand gestures, but every time he fixed a broken piece of machinery or shared a meal with the family, he knew he was doing the right thing. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, RHLR turned to David, her face softening as she spoke. "You have done so much for us already," she said quietly. "You have given us shelter, safety, and a sense of peace that we haven't had in so long. But I know that this is not easy for you. You've taken on a burden you never asked for. I don't want to ask more of you than you are capable of giving." David glanced at her, his eyes filled with a sense of understanding. "You didn't ask for any of this either, RHLR," he said softly. "But I'm not doing this out of obligation. I'm doing this because I want to. I've always wanted something more. I may not have known it until now, but this is what I've been searching for. A purpose. A family. I don't know how much I can give, but I'll give what I can. For you, for Alicia, for Zira." Her eyes glistened as she looked at him, and for the first time since their arrival, David saw a look of peace settle over her. "I do not know what the future holds, David," she said softly, "but I know that my children are safe with you. I know that you have become the man I hoped to find for them, the one who would protect them when the galaxy seemed too vast and too dangerous. You are more than a mechanic, David. You are their father." David's heart skipped a beat at her words. It wasn't the title he had expected, not the one he had ever thought he would earn. But in that moment, it felt real. It felt right. And though it terrified him to admit it, he knew she was right. He had become a father. And despite all the fear and uncertainty, he was ready to embrace that role fully. Chapter 4. The Future Ahead. Months passed, and New Haven began to feel a little less overwhelming. The city was still bustling, its hum of life unrelenting, but David had grown used to his new reality. His shop, the Rusty Gear, was still a modest place, but now it had the warmth of a home. Alicia and Zira had become part of his daily routine. They had grown comfortable in their new life, and so had David. There were still moments of doubt, moments when he questioned if he was truly capable of being the man RHLR and her children needed. But those moments were fewer now. Every time he saw Zira's joyful face or heard Alicia's thoughtful observations about the world, he knew that they were making progress, together. RHLR, too, had found her place in their little family. She had started helping around the shop, using her alien skills to enhance the machines David worked on. While she wasn't a mechanic, her knowledge of technology from her homeworld proved invaluable. Together, they worked side by side, combining their talents to fix the broken things, both machines and lives. David's bond with the children grew stronger each day. Alicia, once distant, now came to him with her questions, seeking his advice on everything from repairing simple gadgets to understanding human customs. Zira was always by his side, following him around the shop and offering her help, her innocence a constant reminder of the life he was trying to build. And every evening, after the work was done, they would gather together for a meal, a quiet moment where they could be a family, where they could forget about the past and focus on the future. Then, one evening, as they sat outside, the familiar sound of hovercars passing overhead, David felt RHLR's hand rest on his. He looked at her, and in that moment, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Hope. It wasn't a fleeting glance or a moment of weakness. It was the quiet, steady assurance that they had found something they had both been searching for. A new beginning. "David," RHLR said softly, her voice steady. "I never imagined that I would find this again. My people are gone, and I thought I would have to live the rest of my life alone, my children growing up without the guidance they deserve. But you've given them that. And you've given me more than I ever thought I could have. I can never repay you for what you've done, but I will spend the rest of my days making sure you know how much you mean to us." David smiled, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. "We're in this together, RHLR. And that's enough for me." And as the stars above New Haven sparkled brightly, David knew that his life had truly changed. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He wasn't just the lonely man trying to get by. He was a father, a husband, and a protector. He had found his place, and together with RHLR, Alicia, and Zira, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but with them by his side, David knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone anymore.